So our job is to protect life. And number 3, Islam brought human dignity to the world. وَلَقَدْ كَرَمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when we say he's a mercy to humanity, to the world, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ, that means that he brought respect to every human being, whether they believe or don't believe. And he would forgive people. He would let people come in. There was a story, a famous story about a man who came into the mosque and started urinating in the mosque. And the companions wanted to beat him. They wanted to push him out. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ either said, just let him finish, or let him be. And then afterwards, he told people, okay, go clean it up. And then we will deal with people. Dr. Hassan Hattout, one of the great Hattouts, the other one passed away last week, he said, the mosque should be like a hospital. We are here to treat people. We are here to cure people. Sometimes we think when somebody comes in the mosque, they have to be what we think is a good Muslim. And if they don't fit that model, well, yeah, they're kind of weird. We already marginalize people when they walk in the mosque. But human dignity means that everyone deserves that respect and that right to be a human being. To be free, to be protected, and to be respected. That's the alternative that we have to give. And then we can stop worrying about why everybody keeps asking us about this issue when we are more vocal and stronger. Let's face it, we don't have a strong communication strategy for America yet. We are working on it. As many press releases you get from MPAC and CARE and ISNA and Shura, all your email inboxes I'm sure is full now by all of our press releases, it doesn't make a dent. What it requires is engaging the larger society on these issues and being a part of civil society as leaders of America. And that is the opportunity that we must offer young Muslims. These young Muslims must be leaders in America, not just leaders in our community, not just doctors or engineers, but public servants, media strategists, people who engage in philanthropy. That is when we will begin to change. Even Kareem Abdul-Jabbar wrote this article in Time magazine. He said, he hopes for a day when these terrorists praising Muhammad or Allah's name as they debase their actual teachings are instantly recognized as thugs disguising themselves as Muslims. And then he ends by saying, I look forward to the day when an act of terrorism by self-proclaimed Muslims will be universally dismissed as nothing more than a criminal attack of a thuggish political organization wearing an ill-fitting Muslim mask. To get to that point, we will need to teach our communities what the real beliefs of Islam are. In the meantime, keep my name, Kareem's name, not mine, on speed dial, if anybody has his number, so we can get through this together. Brothers and sisters, the point is, we cannot do this alone. We have to do this with other Americans. And the more we educate our children and other Americans on this issue, the more effective we will be on this issue. So that our children don't have to apologize for being Muslims. They will be proud of being Muslims in America. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brother Salam, for those
I get a question. I'm going to hand you the camera.
Okay. Working with Brother Salam for a few years at MPAC. And we're really... You're my boss. But really, I'm lucky this panel right here is a panel of my mentors. So I'm truly grateful. And we're also grateful, as Brother Salam pointed out, that not only do we have to be engaged within our own communities and understanding what are the basics of our religion so that we do not get swayed and start believing incorrect messages and to have our youth get rallied into such organizations, but also to engage with our fellow Americans, because that's who we are, and that's who we want to interact with in a peaceful and loving manner. So we'd like to next invite Sheikh Muslim, and she will share with us some ideas of how we can protect our community and our families from such extremist messaging.
Assalamu alaikum. It's an honor to be with all of you today. SubhanAllah, the topic of how do we actually deal with our own young people and make sure that they aren't swayed by the messages that they see in the media sometimes, the messages of extremism that they're getting from different groups. Initially, when you hear that question, if you're involved in the message, you say, well, we don't have extreme youth. Not in our message. We don't have extreme, violent, youth with these tendencies. So, how do we even address this question? And the other thing that tends to happen, unfortunately, is when people talk about ISIS, when they talk about what happened in Paris, there's a lot of conspiracy theory type language that comes out. This actually has nothing to do with us. Someone else is behind this. It's not even Muslims to begin with, and what have you. So I want to just put both of these, arguments on the side and say, let's just say, for the sake of argument, you're right. Let's just say there's a big fat conspiracy, and these extremists are not Muslim at all, and they're, what do people like to usually blame? The Israeli Mossad is training them, right, in tents under the ground or something. That's the argument. Let's just say that's true. Then why do Muslim scholars who protest this in their social media publicly, why are they getting death threats from Muslims? There's a message I got. I had to ban this person from my Facebook, and it was really disturbing. It was a Muslim name that did so, and it's a quote of Ibn Taymiyyah. And I don't know if it's a real quote. They made it into like they didn't even just put the quote by itself. There's a picture. They something like a poster, and it says. This was in response to when I condemned what happened in Paris. The execution of the one who insults the Prophet remains the right of Allah, His Messenger, and the believers, and the one who deserves to be executed cannot be left off, so the punishment must be carried out. And then they have the name Ibn Taymiyyah. So this is a poster that's floating around somewhere on the internet, and the person who left this comment was under the page Islamic Wisdoms. I don't remember the exact name. Regardless, Sheikh Omar Suleiman, Sheikh Yasir Qadi, Imam Suhaib Webb, they can all tell you about death threats, they can all tell you about comments on their page, they can tell you about a bunch of different Muslim names on social media that are arguing with them and fighting with them, these trolls that are supporting hate. So let's just say it was a conspiracy. Let's just say Muslims didn't do any of this. Why are these people supporting it? Why are these voices on social media, putting out posters and saying what they're saying? That means that there is a contingency, even if we don't see them physically in our mosques, there are people who call themselves Muslims who are being fooled by these messages. So then what is our response as a community, and how do we make sure our young people don't get caught up with such people? You look at what are the core causes. There's different articles online about what are the core causes that push a person into a hateful or violent mentality. And then you have to look at what are things that you can do that will alleviate this as a message or as a Muslim community. One of the biggest things is that there is despair. They have an attitude of despair with regards to what's going on politically. So in Masajid, one of the things that we would try to do in ICOI, is to talk about the different political catastrophes that are going on around the world and basing that discussion in our own aqidah, in our own spiritual tradition. So a person who feels like they have no control, telling them what does qadr actually mean? What do the end of days actually mean? What is the Islamic response? How much control do you have? And what they feel usually when we talk about despair is that they feel overwhelmed and they feel powerless. So where does power actually come from in Islam, and how is power supposed to be used? And when something is beyond, your immediate choice, how are you supposed to engage that subject? This is something that needs a spiritual discussion, an aqidah discussion first. As a Muslim, what do I believe? How do I make sense of everything that's going on within my worldview on a spiritual level? So aqidah, or our belief system, is something that can provide healing. It can also provide guidance, and it shows people that there is hope. That it's not an issue of despair. I can look at the situation in Syria and say, all of this is happening, but I still have hope in God for a better day tomorrow based on my spiritual tradition. And I will engage, that issue in a way that God is pleased with. So that's something that requires a level of training. The second thing that sometimes leads to this is religious ignorance. So a person can get fooled by a statement like that you see on a poster because they are actually very ignorant of their own faith. So in masajid, and not just in masajid, but especially online, because as Imam Sohaib said for the bombers in Boston, that they were not radicalized in the masjid, they were radicalized online. So now we have to take education and make it very accessible in the online world. When dealing with the subject of jihad and what are the ethics of war in Islam, what are the ethics of fighting, what does it mean to have a peaceful contract, like these are issues that we need to have serious education on. So that ignorance is dispelled. The other, the thing that is a major part of this is personality worship. So a person would worship a particular personality. They start to see them in a certain way. This Zarqawi figure becomes, he's perhaps very, charismatic or whatnot. So young people, people in general need to be taught not to worship personalities. That it's, there's a balance in this, and that when you hear anything from a religious leader, from anyone, we have to train our communities to be critical thinkers, so they have some guidelines by which they filter information through. But also that if someone is proclaiming something and they don't have scholarly or religious authority to do so, we can't give them that right. So there was someone who had proclaimed that a particular jihad, they had declared that a particular jihad was going on between Muslims in America. That person has no scholarly authority. They have no ability to proclaim anything. And so they need to, this is something that people need to realize, is that scholarship is important. There's a reason why someone who has studied Islam for 30 years is allowed to make a certain statement. Someone who doesn't have that background is not allowed to make that statement. And even if someone has studied Islam and they do have the requisite background, that scholar is still supposed to not be followed blindly. They are still subject to critical thinking and the engagement of the Muslim community. And this is important that you have that balance, because you did have, in the Muslim world, you had scholars who had the requisite educational background to support state-sponsored terrorism, right? So you did see certain people who had the background. And you also have people like Zarqawi, like, unfortunately, Anwar al-Awlaqi, who said things and they don't have the scholarly background to say it, they don't have the authority to say it. So I think we need to be very careful who we label sheikh in our community. It doesn't matter if they're eloquent or not eloquent, if they have a long beard, if they wear a robe. It's really interesting to see the way that we give authority as a community to people. I was in the UK, and there was a brother who had memorized the entire Quran, and he had come in and he was wearing a robe and he had a long beard, and he had a little bit of an accent with his British accent, an Eastern accent. And everyone just started calling him sheikh. He has no background in scholarship for him to have this authority with them. He's not a sheikh. And you had someone else who was in a suit, clean-shaven, not clean-shaven, small, Dr. Salam Abadi beard, or smaller beard. And this person actually had a 4-year degree in Sharia. And they also had a counseling background, and they're licensed therapists, all of this, but because they spoke perfect British English, and because they showed up in a suit, nobody was calling them, no one was calling them sheikh. So we're giving authority to people just based on, an exterior look. And that's something, again, that within our masajid, within our institutions, we have to teach people to respect. You don't go to a doctor because he called himself doctor. He has to have that educational background. The same applies to those who we call our scholars. And even if they, again, did have that scholarly background, training our community to be critical in the way that they evaluate what he says. Another issue that leads to extremism and violence is isolation. And this is true not just for when you think about terrorist acts, but kids who get caught up in gangs or get caught up in other violent acts, and young people who get caught up with the wrong sort of actions in America. One of the biggest things is they feel isolated, or they're experiencing some level of isolation and powerlessness in their own life. So as was mentioned by Dr. Salam, the masjid has to be a sanctuary. I don't know how many people have seen the documentary Unmasked. And it's a really sad, but it's a documentary where this entire thing is like singing, stringing the the strings of my heart, because it's explaining a lot of the dissonance that Muslims feel in the masjid. So imagine if people who are practicing feel this level of dissonance. Imagine the young person who comes in to the masjid. Is the masjid going to embrace them? I know imams who feel very unmosqued, like religious leaders who feel unmosqued. Like that means that this is a problem in terms of the culture of our masjid. And if you don't want people to become isolated, then we have to change that culture, consciously and actively. And as Dr. Sana mentioned, the masjid is not just a place that only certain types of people who fit a certain type of, criteria comes to. Everyone should feel welcome in the masjid. Everyone should feel like it's a place to heal. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he said that the wolf attacks the lone sheep. So it's really easy to get radicalized when you're isolated, but it's very hard to do so when you feel love, when you feel genuine love and brotherhood and sisterhood. And that's the environment you want to create in the masjid. One of the things I remember noticing myself when I was in college and MSA was there was a high ethic of brotherhood and sisterhood in the MSA. There was a lot of brothers' social activities and brothers' gatherings and outings, and actually the brothers would spend the night in each other's apartments a lot because they would stay up late and study together, to the extent that it was called the refugee camp, because you have 12 brothers in a 2-bedroom apartment just studying together. But one thing that was amazing about that is that brotherhood itself, the true brotherhood itself, changed these people's lives. So these were, a lot of these young men were people whose families went to the masjid, but they didn't really care about Islam. They were the kinds of people who wouldn't talk about Islam. They weren't very proud of their faith. But when they came into a space like MSA, they had a chance to be loved and to express themselves even politically in a healthy way. So subhanAllah, this is really important, again, in terms of the way that we think about our masjid as fighting the tendency towards isolation. The masjid should not be a place that causes people to flee. The other aspect is that when people feel powerless, the models of healthy engagement have to be there for them. So I've heard some people say actually that Muslims right now shouldn't be involved in anything political. They should just focus in spiritual matters and their education. It's the end of the world, it's the end of times. And subhanAllah, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he said that if you knew that the day of judgment was tomorrow, you knew that the end of times basically for humankind is coming, and you had a seed, a tree that you wanted to plant, still go and plant that seed. So the Muslim never has this, even if you think, subhanAllah, this is, again, through our faith tradition, even if you knew that you were going to die tomorrow, you live your life to the fullest, and you contribute as much as possible to your last breath. And subhanAllah, this is something that organizations like Impact and CARE need to be supported in our community. There's something that CARE does called the Muslim Game Changers Network, and it shows young people, it shows how to get them engaged politically in a healthy way. I know Impact also does a leadership summit with young people, showing them how to engage American politics. I don't think it's the time to flee political participation. It's actually the time to run towards it, but in a very healthy manner, and using the organizations that exist that are doing an amazing job. There's 2 other points. One of them is that sometimes the people who are falling into this type of radicalization, I would say most of the time, if they're falling into it, there is an issue of mental illness. I would love to see masajid all across America hire licensed therapists, male and female licensed therapists. The imam is not trained to do the counseling that he does. And I can tell you it takes a toll on him because he's not trained to know how to even alleviate the pressures of that. But licensed therapists are trained for that. We have Muslim licensed therapists, and we need to make sure that our masajid can, have a fund where they can actually pay for this in-house. A lot of times my husband, when he was the imam at ICOI, people would come to him and they just wanted to sort of vent to a religious figure. So he would listen to everything, and then he would give them the phone number or access to a Muslim therapist, and people usually were too lazy to take the second step. And so that's why people do go to the masjid still. For some reason, they'd rather talk to an imam than talk to, it's still taboo, unfortunately, in our community. We need to make it untaboo. I think we should bring the therapists into our masajid, and make it accessible to everyone. The last point is something that Dr. Sam also mentioned, which is that the quote from, I think it was, you said, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. This is something, subhanAllah, my husband and I were talking about this, and we said, how come is it that whenever a catastrophe happens, right now it's happening unfortunately like every 2 weeks, But whenever a catastrophe happens, our community all of a sudden remembers that they have